Hi everyone, I'm Mercedes with Rocky Nook. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're happy to have you. Thanks for making time to join us for this webinar. I just want to tell you a couple little details first before we get started, which is today's webinar is on Hidden Wonders, Masking Techniques from Adobe Photoshop with Steve Laskevitch. He's going to join us in just a second to take us through a really great presentation that hopefully will help all of you. He also wrote a book called Adobe Photoshop, a complete course and compendium. So if you already have the book, we'd love it if you could help us out and review us on Amazon or on our website, rockynook.com. If you don't have the book, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited that you'll get a chance to learn a little bit more about it. And also you can save 40% off your purchase of that book at rockynook.com with the code APSCC40. I'll type that in the chat for you guys. And then that'll also be, it should also be in your confirmation email. And also tomorrow you'll get an email that includes that coupon code and a link to the book. And it will also have a replay link. So if you miss anything in today's webinar, or if there's something you want to look back and try again or see Steve talk about it again, you will have that link sent to you tomorrow. So like I said, today we have Steve Laskevitch joining us to talk about masking techniques from Adobe Photoshop. So since you are all here to see him and not me, I will go ahead and welcome Steve and let him take over from here. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, you're still on mute.
Yep.
There you are. Great.
Hello. And I said, look for the guy in the Panama fedora, but I'm going to lose that because it makes it too dark in here. As you can see, I am in Seattle, the home of the resistance. And so I hope the distractions aren't too profound. I'm going to immediately go to a screen sharing now and leave you to wherever you are instead of in Seattle. So let me actually get this rolling here. And there is a slide. And I hope you are seeing that. So this is me, and I happen to be an Adobe certified instructor, and I own an Adobe authorized training center called Luminous Works. We have a motto, and it's, I think, pretty cool. I'm not going to talk about that business very much. I'm going to talk about masking, which I hope doesn't have bad connotations in this day and age. I have a mask, but I'm not going to be wearing it. I'm talking about something else. So let me actually get in here. It's probably reassuring to know that I have used Photoshop for a little while, just a smidge. I know there are some people listening right now who may have the same kind of history. I've authored a few books for Rocky Nook. These are the two most recent ones, and that leads us to this. So I want to talk about just a little snippet from this book, and that is about masking, hiding what you don't want to see. And as we said in the blurb that we sent out, when you don't mask, if you simply choose to erase, well, you end up being filled with regret. So let's jump right in and talk about the different kinds of masking. I'm going to just do a little review here of what a standard layer mask is. You might already be familiar with this, but some folks find the concept a little difficult. They're taught to just memorize. I paint with white or I paint with black and something happens. But there's a reason why it happens. But it is helpful, I think, if you're familiar with the concept, which is that of a slide. If you're quite young, you might not know what this is. This is called a slide, a transparency. And back in the ancient times of the 20th century, we would take such a thing, this transparency, and we would put it into a projector like this. So you would take the slide, put it into the available slot, you can see there next to the lens, and then you would project that image onto a screen. Very exciting. Now, the part to take away from this and why this might be even slightly relevant to our topic is that the white parts of that image, the clouds, are essentially clear film, which is why the light shines clear through the slide and gets to the screen and gets very illuminated. The dark parts of the image hold back the light. and therefore there's not much light projected onto the screen. And that allows us to take a second slide, perhaps like this one, where we don't have as much detail, although one can have as much tonality as you like. But here we have some clear film and some opaque black. And if we were to sandwich the two and project them, kind of like this, the black part of the masking slide holds back the light. So that part of the image, the sky, never even shows up. It just doesn't even show up on the screen. All we see is the part we hopefully want to see. The tricky part is white where you want it and black where you want it. And that has always been a little bit of a difficult part. Here they're a little bit offset from each other. So let me actually show you an example. And you're like, oh good, this is not going to be just all slideshow. No, it's not. Let me jump over to Photoshop. And unfortunately, it's a picture of yours truly. It's my old, very old, always pre-COVID, and not as long as it is now, and a little less gray. But we're going to take this dude and we're going to hide parts of that image such that we can see here the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which I have conveniently blurred to fake the depth of field that we see in this photo. Now, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the changes in Photoshop that have been occurring with every update, but there are a couple of functions that have gotten really good. So good, in fact, they're going to put me out of a job, I suspect. I hope you can see up here that I have a couple of buttons, Select Subject and Select and Mask. Those are available because I just hit the letter W, which takes me to a little suite of tools here that just conveniently throw those buttons up there, but I can get to Select and Mask at any time from the Select menu. I'm going to go there directly. Here's Select and Mask, and it's showing me the onion skin view, which is fine for the moment, but also conveniently that Select Subject button has appeared. Now, if you tried this, oh, I don't know, a couple months ago, even when it was first introduced, maybe a year ago, something like that, you might have tried it and gone, it's not that great. It doesn't know my subjects very well. Well, every update we've had, every little update, every .00 whatever update, this has been improved, and in some cases dramatically. Check it out. Hit Select Subject. Damn. I can't believe it. It's just blows me. It's got a fairly good look at that hair. The edges of that wool jacket are nice and fuzzy, pretty much, I think, but we need to be sure. So let me have a look at different views here instead of onion skin. Maybe I'll view this on black. And I can see it's not perfect, but true. If you were in an awful hurry, Select Subject, even oddly shaped subjects. Take, for example, a stuffed plush fruit. You'll see one of those later. I can do this on white, but that's probably not a good enough challenge since the original background was also light. But the real proof is on layers here, where I can see that other layer underneath. So hopefully this will be, yes, I still have Peachy. Sorry, I just saw a comment. Yes, of course Peachy's going to be here. Now I look over here at this hair problem. I always have a hair problem, and I want to deal with that. Now I can do a few other things. I got a little radius thing going here, which might help around the edges of the jacket or not. Smart radius, still not being enough of an effect. But if I take this, the Refine Edge brush tool, or the hair helper tool, as I like to think of it, I can whisk this around where the ambiguous parts of the hair are and have Photoshop think a lot harder about them. And you're still thinking, Steve, I'm not sure I'm buying that. That's because there's still some of that marble that was behind me lingering in the hair. So let's decontaminate that. Let's get the marble out of the hair, marble dust, I guess. I don't know if you saw that. Let me do that again. That's so cool. So without decontamination and with decontamination. So what is it doing exactly? If you've not seen this before, I hope you have, because it is so beautiful. Let me show you this. In this area, there's this slender band. Let me put this on the white here so you can see it. There's a slender band that I've gotten from using this radius slider and by painting with the Refine Edge brush tool. Let me do a little bit more over here for more of the flyaway hairs. And this area that you see here, Photoshop is doing some pretty amazing edge detection in. And in that area, it's willing to add a bunch of gunk, either ear color where the ears are, hair color where the hair is, to help out with this masking endeavor. Back to on layers. Pretty amazing. But what you get in the end is this. Remember that slide? The black and white slide? Here we got some gray, which is awesome. That means translucent. So we are allowed to see a little bit of what's there and it takes away a little bit of what's there. And in the end, when I hit OK, because it actually added color, it made a duplicate layer. So I have my original still intact. It does a fairly sweet job of putting black and white where they need to be to hide and show what we want. Now there's a little bit of daylight shining on that forehead, and I'm going to want to do something about that in a moment. But I want to talk about a different form of masking first, because it's the kind that I'm going to need to use to ensure that any adjustment I apply to the dude here is applied only to that face and not to the whole image. So let's talk about a different form of masking, and first via its concept, because this can be slippery and tricky. It's a kind of mask called a clipping mask. Now I wonder if some of you also use Adobe Illustrator. In Adobe Illustrator, there's a form of masking called a clipping mask, which hides anything and everything outside a certain perimeter. That perimeter for us is going to be that rocket ship, which I'm calling a clipper ship for no reason except it's going to clip. And this is a simulation here, so bear with me. If I have a layer visible above that rocket ship, here's one I call grunge. It's just some texture I photographed. I love photographing textures. I want to see that texture only on the rocket ship, only on the rocket ship. And there's a way to do it, and it's easy. As long as that grunge is the layer immediately above the rocket or that other shape. It doesn't matter what the shape is. It could be some guy standing with a wool jacket in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But if I take my cursor and I option click on a Mac or alt click on Windows on the line between those top two layers, between the rocket ship and the grunge, in other words, that rocket ship acts as a support, a foundation that holds that grunge layer up. And I like to think of the rest as crumbling away and falling away to invisibility. What's neat is both of those layers remain independently editable, but one is controlling where the other is seen. Now I have a couple of examples for this. First, this one, and I'm going to get this image out of here because I'm sick of looking at that face. If I were to make an adjustment, I don't know, maybe curves, and I hope where I've put my tools and whatnot is not distracting. I've learned from a good friend and a wise Photoshop user named John Cornicello to put my tools on the right, and I really like that suggestion. Now I'm going to go to the blue channel and take a little blue out. Let me exaggerate it, and you'll see that it's affecting absolutely everything. But if I option click on a Mac, alt click on the layer on the line between these two layers, right over here, alt or option click on the line between those two layers. Now, I better do something about that. Now I can go back here. Oops. Here. It reverted back to the RGB curve. I can take some of that yellow out and make it a much more subtle adjustment. So I get some of that blue out of the forehead. Maybe. Mostly I just wanted to have an excuse to show you how to clip an adjustment layer to the layer below it. In fact, that's such a common need when you composite images. Take one image, put it where it never really belonged. You'll have to adjust the lighting or color on the introduced content to better sell the lie. And so it's really common to need to clip an adjustment or two or three to the layer right below. Let me share another example, a little less photographic, Not all of us are photographers, although nothing wrong with that, of course. And in fact, I'll close this. Well, I'll leave it open in case questions come up. Here we go. So here I've got just what was a type layer. I made it into a shape. And it's been masked a little bit, just with a standard layer mask to make it look a little bit more organic around the edges. I've added some effects so that it looks a little more dimensional, maybe even possibly translucent. You'll decide if that's really effective or not. And now above it, I have a couple layers that are not currently visible. One is a photo of some tortoiseshell. And what I'd really like to do is make that tortoiseshell look like it's what is forming the word clip. That is, the word clip is made out of tortoiseshell. And that's going to be really easy, at least at first approach. So if I have both visible, Option click, Alt click on that line between. Now, that's a pretty effective instant mask. And think about this too. The word clip has this layer mask on it. That layer mask is now kind of affecting both of these layers. If I were to paint more on this black and white mask, it would affect where the tortoiseshell is visible because it affects where the clip layer is visible, which is what is controlling where the tortoiseshell layer is visible. Now, one interesting thing, and it's touchy and it's tricky about clipping masks in Photoshop. This tortoiseshell has more or less replaced the native content of the clip layer, which was just the color purple. Right? Now it's tortoiseshell. And the effects that we had residing on the word clip are now affecting the tortoiseshell because that is essentially the content of this effect, the content of the word clip. And if I added another layer to this, and I have this silly little band across here with some kind of pattern overlay, not very effective, I don't like it, but whatever. And I Alt click or Option click on the line between the top two layers now, it's this ensemble. It becomes part of the clipping mask ensemble. I can't call it a group because a group is something else that this might be similar to in some ways, but it isn't a group. Now, all this is fine so far. But what if I wanted to see through the tortoiseshell? Because tortoiseshell really is translucent. And I want to kind of perceive some of those cracks in there. Now, back before I made this a clipping mask, what I could have done with the layer called clip is I could have changed its blending mode. And depending on the imagery, blending modes themselves can sort of be masks. So I might have used multiply. And that would give me this transparent effect. In fact, multiply is a nice way to simulate a transparency, speaking of slides earlier. And because what's clipped becomes the native content of the whole ensemble, if I turn this on, I see the tortoiseshell is indeed translucent. In other words, the blending mode applied to the base layer of this clipping mask, the clip layer, its blending mode, its effects affect the whole ensemble. And if I add this, unfortunately, this band, the scratched band, it also inherits that blending mode. And I don't necessarily want it to. In other words, I'd like it to maintain its own blending mode of normal. I wouldn't mind having tortoiseshell have the blending mode of multiply to look translucent, and I don't want to see anything to do with the clip layer except for its effects. This is tricky. So let's see how we can achieve it. Well, I don't know if you know about layer grouping, but when you have a group of layers, you can change the blending mode and opacity of the group. And right now, this is sort of acting as a group. If I were to look at the blending options of this clip layer, the base layer of this clipping mask, I double click near the name, not on the name. So maybe I should show you another way, because if you double clicked on the name, you would actually be renaming it. More often than not, I might right click near the name and look for blending options there near the top. And here are the blending options. And there are some basic ones. You know, there's multiply and opacity. all dandy. Of course, if I take the opacity down, that clip layer disappears, and so does the whole ensemble. Because again, I remind you, in a clipping mask, that bottom layer controls everything about the whole ensemble. But generally, if I lower the fill opacity, now this is going to be 2 steps forward and we need to go 3 steps back or something. If I take the fill opacity away from this layer, well, I maintain the effects, but I lose the tortoiseshell, I lose the band, because what fill opacity makes disappear is native content of a layer. It leaves effects. But right now, these 2 layers, the scratched band, the tortoiseshell, they have replaced the native content. They're acting as the native content. Well, there's a way around that. A subtle little checkbox here. Blend clipped layers, yeah, that's those guys, as a group. That is, treat this like a group where if you change the blend mode of the group, it affects everybody. I don't want to do that. I disable that. Now the fill opacity has no effect on them. It has essentially made the purple disappear. I'll prove that to you. If I hide these 2 layers, I can see that the purple disappears and appears with the change to the fill opacity. I'm going to set that layer's blend mode to normal. I'll turn on the tortoiseshell. Now it gets its own blend mode. So if I set it to multiply now, it can have its own blending because, again, I remind you, blend clip layers as group is turned off. So each clip layer is going to blend on its own. And if the scratched band is also normal, it maintains its opacity, but they still get this awesome benefit of being visible only where the clip layer is, and they get the benefit of the effects that reside on that layer. It's tricky, huh? You can say yes. Yeah, it is. Oh, I think it is anyway. So basics of a clipping mask are pretty basic. An option click or an alt click, and one layer is visible where another is. That's simple. It's when you want to do more sophisticated things like blending that it can get complicated, but Photoshop users, as we are, can be really annoying. And we pester the engineers enough where they will occasionally give us a feature that we ask for, an ability to change something that we want changed. And so they've given us this capability, though you have to dig for it. And when you do dig for it, in those blending options, in particular, the advanced blending options, the only way you know that you've affected those advanced blending options, like turning this checkbox on or off, is to look for this little icon. It's 2 interlocked rectangles. And that's the way you know that there's something in there that you've adjusted. It doesn't tell you what you adjusted, just that there's some setting that you've messed with. So if you receive a Photoshop doc like this from someone and you're uncertain how it was achieved, you might have to go peeking into those blending options and seeing what was manipulated. In fact, the next 2 forms of masking I want to discuss with you benefit from this as well. So we're going to spend some time looking at that dialog box. All right. I hope that wasn't too scary. Let me talk about something freakier, though. So let me go back to Keynote here and introduce you to something called Knockout. The simulated layers panel I have here has got a few more things in it than the previous example, but nothing too complicated. I've got a background at the bottom filled with blue. You can't see it now because there's a bunch of layers on top. So I'm filled with greens. And then above that, a couple red layers. And at the very top, my little rocket ship again. I like rocket ships. You should look at the cover of the Photoshop book. You'll see. Anyway, I've got the 2 red layers in the rocket ship grouped, which is easy. You highlight several layers, Command G or Control G, boom. They are in a little folder, and it's this nice organizational principle. Nothing that complicated. I'll show you in a minute. But what I'd like to do is to use the rocket not as the foundation, the area that says where things are visible. I want to use it as a drill to poke holes in layers. And I can control to some extent which layers it drills through. To do this, we need those advanced blending options, which you've seen, but I'm going to hide most of that dialogue here. There was something in there called knockout, which simulates a drill going through a couple layers. Now, when you drill a hole with a drill and it has a big old drill bit on it, you don't see the hole until you take the drill out. So what we have to do to take the drill out, quote, end quote, is lower the fill opacity of that top layer, that rocket ship. And when we do, we can see through it to the holes we drilled. And what do we see in the hole? The first layer beyond the group, which is filled with green. So now we have a rocket ship shaped hole right through those other layers in the same group. Doesn't matter how many there were, 200, all in the same group, we will have drilled a hole in the shape of that layer through them. So masking from above this time. Now that's the effect of shallow knockout. It drills holes through layers in the same group. If I change it to deep, we drill a hole through every layer below that, stopping at a background layer, if there is one. If there isn't, we have transparency there. But since this background does exist and it's filled with blue, we now see blue where that is. I think it's cool. I remember, however, when I first learned this, I had to really make up excuses to use it because it's not something I use maybe every day, but often enough now that I've made myself use it. Here's an example. I'll turn to this image. Oh, who's that? Some folks who are listening right now and viewing this might know Peachy the Peach. She tends to appear in just about every Photoshop class or demonstration I do. She's a stuffed fruit, our mascot. She's she's well in her 20s now, so she's almost as old as Photoshop, which is 30. Long story. Anyway, looks like Peachy's in prison. That's because her inner evil self has been acting out. What I want to do is I want to use this layer, this little green layer, which has some effects on it. It has a stroke and a bevel and emboss affecting the stroke, so it looks like a little frame around the edges. Nothing really worth mentioning. So why did I? I don't know. And if I were to group this layer and the Peachy layer, so I'll highlight both. There we go, both of those. Command G or Control G. I'll expand the group so you can see those two layers are inside the group. Now I'm going to mess with the blending options of this layer I named Scanner, just that rectangle. Blending options, here they are. And I will change the knockout to shallow. A hole has now been drilled right through Peachy's roundness, but I don't see the hole yet because I haven't lowered the fill opacity yet. And as I do, I can see the next layer below Peachy, which is a little frightful. I might not lower it all the way because I kind of like that greenish-ness. It kind of reminds me of some kind of weird, like sci-fi scanning device, something like that. And again, what's really cool about this, and also is true of the clipping mask, is if I move this layer around, it's like I'm getting this wonderful cutaway view. In fact, I've used it for that purpose. You know, photographing some, I can't remember what the product was. It was some kind of electronic apparatus. And I did two photos, one with a chassis over the guts of the electronic thing, and one with the chassis removed, so I could do a cutaway view wherever my client told me to put it. And this was a neat solution. So we could alter the size and shape of the scanner layer to make a smaller hole, bigger hole, odd-sized hole. So let me do a little free transform on it. So we can have a hole in whatever dimensions we like and move it wherever we like. Isn't that disturbing? Poor Peachy. And as complete as we like. But again, this is drilling a hole through any layer in the same group as this. If I wanted to go through more layers than that, I have to get back to my advanced blending options and change knockout from shallow to deep. And now I'm drilling a hole clean through all the layers up to that background because it is a background. Without it, it would be transparent all the way down. So now, X-ray vision. I like this. I use this a lot now that I have excuses to use it. Not, again, not daily. It's not one of those things I use all the time, but enough, a lot to reinforce its use. And this is a fun example, I think. I hope you like that. Let me put this back to shallow. I want to see the evil Peachy. There we go. It's so disturbing. All right. So that's nifty. Now I'm on the fence here. I got a little time, I think, to share an interesting puzzle that I was given by a student. One of the things we offer at Luminous Works when we do a class is pretty much unlimited email contact after. So if someone after a class comes up with a question that's somewhat relevant to the class material, I welcome those questions, even many years, even decades after the class has passed. And one student asked me a question at one point. He wanted to take a black and white line drawing and make it look like it was drawn with chalk on a blackboard. It seemed like a really good question to me. And so here I have this black and white line drawing. It was really black on white. And I've turned it into a smart object here. It was actually, this is from Adobe Illustrator, the rendering is. So I inverted it, added some noise to it, blurred it very, very slightly, just to get it to look more chalk drawn. And to make the black, what was white, is now black, disappear. I'm going to use the blending mode called screen. And that solution is what I emailed him. I said, hey, this is what you could do. A couple filters, maybe adjust the opacity down a little bit, and it might be compellingly chalk-like, or at least chalky enough. And he was happy. He thanked me. And then he said, oh, but Steve, I want to make it look like it's been erased. Here and there. I want to be able to paint on it and make it look erased. I'm like, oh yeah, no problem, no problem. Here's what we'll do. That blackboard is a background, so I have this layer that I've painted on. I'm sparing you watching me paint during this presentation. I'm not a great painter, but here's some paint. And I want to use that to drill a hole in that illustration as if it was erased. So I take those two layers, put them in a group. I guess I didn't strictly have to. Now that I think about it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Go to the blending options for the erasure. You know what? I don't have to put them in the group, and I'm not going to. That's right, I'm changing my mind. I'm just going to go straight away to the blending options. And since it's not in a group, it really won't matter whether I choose shallow or deep. And lower that fill opacity. And now, haha, I've got erasure. So I sent that to my student. His name was Tom. And he's like, dude, that's great. Oh, but wait, that looks really too completely erased. Wouldn't it be like some faintness? Like, look at the rest of that blackboard. You see traces, chalky traces of that drawing. I'm like, dude, this is getting hard now. So I said, okay. I made a duplicate of that illustration smart object. Let me show you what it looks like. And I blurred it more. I made it distinctly blurry with some motion blur, lowered the opacity a good deal more. So it looks kind of like someone took an eraser and didn't do a very good job erasing the whole thing. But I want to see that only where I did the erasure. In other words, I want this erasure layer to not only be a knockout mask for the layer below it, I want it to be the support and a clipping mask showing the layer above it. And I wanted this really badly. I spent an inordinate amount of time, and then it turns out the solution was actually fairly easy. Right now, oh, I guess I've already got this going here. Well, right now I don't, because it actually looks like I do, but I see faint traces of the erasure everywhere right now. Let me show you. See, it's still everywhere. It's not clipped to this layer yet. If I option click, alt click between the erasure and the erasure traces, I've now clipped the erasure traces to the erasure layer. But remember, I lowered the fill opacity on that, which means the native content of that erasure layer is now hidden. And when you clip one layer to another, the clipped layer becomes the native content. And I've lowered its fill opacity, so I can't see those traces. This was making me crazy. Then I remembered, oh, wait. In the blending options, there's blend clipped layers as group. If I disable that, that means each of those two layers maintains its own blending options, which means the fill opacity on the erasure layer no longer affects this erasure traces layer. So I got this one layer to serve as both a clipping mask support and a knockout mask to the layer below it. So if I were to paint, bear with me, I'm going to paint. Job painting here. Make that brush bigger, and it doesn't matter what color I paint with, but that will hide the layer below, reveal the layer above, no matter where I do it. So I can paint freely, change my mind, deal with a client because they change their minds, and no harm comes. I like this solution a lot. Oh, and then there was one more twist. Oh, it can't be a blackboard. It has to be green. So I threw a layer at the top, green, set to screen mode. So it replaces the black of the blackboard. I believe that was the end of that interrogation, but I loved this question from that student, and it became an exercise in the Photoshop book. Carefully spelled out step by step, so one can achieve the same result. My editor even found it to be fun. She even commented to me that that was a fun exercise, which made me feel really good. One more. It's a really freaky form of masking. Are you hanging in there? Yeah? Good. This is called Blendiff. Blendiff. Yeah, and I'm out of metaphors. So I'm just going to kill this and go straight to the example. Here's Blendiff. I learned this with an example involving lightning, and every time I teach it using lightning just for fun, just as a tradition. So here I have a layer, it has lightning. It's a lot of black, but it has some lightning. Below that is this layer that looks like, floating stone in the sky because, it does that. And below that, some clouds. And I recall there was, one of the Harry Potter movies had text like this. I think it was supposed to be made out of metal, kind of floating through the sky. And I said, oh, that's a cool effect. I want that. So I've hidden most of the means to achieving this effect on text from you. Don't take it personally, because that's not what this class or this demonstration is about. This is about hiding stuff where you don't want to see it based on its own tone. So that is this lightning layer. I want to hide that layer where it's darkest. So one more trip into the blending options, to the Blendiff sliders right there, Blendiff. And I'll leave it on gray. I remember this phrasing and the sliders' names puzzling me quite a lot. So what helped me, and I'll share this with you, is that I, in my mind, replaced the word blend with visible. And suddenly it clicked. So what I'm doing here is I'm adjusting this lightning layer, and I can read this to you. It says the lightning layer is visible if the shades of gray on this layer are between 0 and 255. Well, that's all the shades of gray you get. But if I move this slider here on the 0 end, start moving a little bit more, a little bit more. I'll stop here at what, 40, 39, 40, something like that. That means any shade of gray darker than that, a pretty dark gray, any gray darker than that, invisible. Now, an objection a lot of people have is that the cutoff looks awfully abrupt, and it is. But if your eyes are sharp, you might notice that each of these sliders has a little split in it, which won't do you any good until you're holding down your Option key or Alt key on Windows. And when you hold down that key, you can split either half of the slider so it becomes a gradation, that is, a fade from visible to invisible. So here, I'll put this right at a midtone here. So from midtones down to a shade of 24, that's the range that gradually disappears, completely blinking out under a 24. So if you want to base the visibility of a layer on its own tonality, this is an awesome way to do it. But what it gets even more awesome is you can base this layer's opacity or this layer's visibility on the layers underneath it too. So if I wanted to hide it where the clouds are light or the stone is light, I can do that. And that lightning starts disappearing where the clouds are lighter. Or perhaps, maybe it's better, especially in the upper left there, to hide it where the clouds are darker. And just a question of finding a happy setting if there is one. And what might actually also help this, and would have gone a long way to help at the beginning, was changing the blend mode to something like screen or color dodge. Has that little bit of blueness to it. Oh yeah, and this is maybe an insensitive image to use for those of you in California right now. I didn't think of that. Sorry, hope you guys are holding up. So now I've hidden that lightning layer where it's dark and where the underlying layer is dark, which means if that underlying layer moves around, it changes what's light and dark underneath the lightning, and therefore where the lightning is visible and invisible. So if I swapped out a different cloud image, the lightning would adapt, which I think is really cool. If I did a tonal adjustment in the clouds layer, the lightning would adapt to that too in real time. I think it's way cool. This one took a while to introduce and get integral into my own workflows, but once I made myself use it a few times, I can't stop. There we go. All right, I hope that's useful. I wanted to talk for about 45 minutes, or at least get to about this point in the clock, and then we can maybe turn to some Q&A, because I like that sort of thing. Hopefully there's some Q that I can A.
We don't have any questions yet, so I'd like to encourage everyone, if you do have questions, go ahead and submit them now, either in the chat or in the question and answer box.
I may have stunned people. I don't know. I could have
You
hurt
may have
them.
just explained it so well that there are no questions.
Or it was psychically harming. I don't know.
Yeah. So while we wait and see if anyone has questions to submit, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your course and compendium series?
No. Yes, of course I do. The course and compendium series, it's 3 books currently. 2 of them I wrote, one on InDesign, one on Photoshop. The first section of each book is a full course, more or less corresponding to our curriculum at Luminous Works, from beginning to advanced courses. And then the latter part of the book is a compendium, a reference section that the course may refer to periodically, but also will serve the reader after the course is completed, so that you go through the lessons and you don't just chuck the book. You have a book that will serve you. And depending on the software, like Illustrator and InDesign especially, changes from version to version have not been as momentous as they may have been in the past, so the book will actually serve for a long time. In Photoshop, there may be some changes that seem remarkable, but it's mostly a case of degree, though occasionally there's something big and life-altering. And when that happens, we'll, of course, integrate that into the next edition. There are also 2 other books. One is also finished, Adobe Illustrator, by my friend Jason Hoppy, and Ben Goldsmith, who teaches video products at Luminous Works for me. He's working on a Premiere Pro book, and that's coming along right now. He's writing it, I'm laying it out, and we're trying to do as good a job as possible. I think it's going to be a fine book. He's enjoying writing it immensely, as to Jason, which I find that really pleasing. So, have any questions appeared?
Yes, we have one from Jennifer. She asks,
Hi,
can you
Jennifer.
show again how you got to select subject?
Yes, I can. I guess you want me to. All right, sorry, that was evil. Let me get a subject worth selecting. Now, yeah, it doesn't appear up in the options bar until either you have the right tool or you just don't look there. So if I were to click one of these tools, where the ancient venerable magic wand is quick selection tool, object selection tool. By hitting W on my keyboard, for example, select subject will appear in the options bar. But you don't need to do that. You can always go to the select menu and you'll find subject listed there. And a couple of other goodies like focus area, which tries to find the sharp things in sharp focus, color range, things of a certain color, all good stuff. And select subject. If I just did it straight away here, I see marching ants crawling in my hair, and that's a pretty good selection. You saw the results of that earlier. So you can get to that anytime. Also, if you were to go to the select and mask task space, and again, you can get to that from any tool at any time by going to the select menu and choosing select and mask. And there you also find select subject. I hope that helps. And oh, and make sure you have Photoshop up to date. Unlike some other software that might nuke some things, this does not. And Photoshop is, every time is an update. Select subject and a few other functions are getting radically upgraded because of their artificial intelligence learning. Any other questions?
Yeah, someone else has asked if you offer online courses.
Sometimes. Our model, and in the COVID era, this has been a real challenge. Our model has always been face-to-face, hands-on training in a small classroom. So in normal times, our classroom accommodates, sorry, I just realized my face is there. I just don't want to see that. Okay, there we go. That, better. Our classroom accommodates 9 people, small classroom. These days, for maintaining safe distancing, we have 4 seats. But because of the times we live in, besides offering small, very small face-to-face classes and lots of mitigation for COVID, we're also doing some classes as on-demand video currently. So there are a few classes you can enroll in. You'll have 2 weeks instead of 2 days to do them. They have the same benefits of unlimited email follow-up. And like all our classes, you can take them again for free within a year. Hopefully next year, that means face-to-face, if you like, if you're local, or you can do the on-demand video once again, if that is a better model for you. Depending on the state of things and the state I'm in, to Washington, here in the States, if people behave themselves and we come out of isolation and there's maybe a vaccine, well, we probably won't be doing online as much. But if people don't behave, we'll do more and more via this medium. I really wish I could see you all. I love teaching to people's faces, but I'm just trying to picture you. So we'll do this as we have to, but not if we don't.
We have kind of 2 questions that go together from Linda. What does Smart Radius do, and how should we save the results? And also, do you use Smart Object with this technique?
I'll answer the latter one first. You can use Smart Objects with this usually, and there's no necessity to do so. If you have a layer that's a Smart Object, it can undergo this as well, but a duplicate getting made might be, well, it depends if you have the decontamination kick in. Let me actually take Peachy here and the way I made that mask on her. So let me dupe that layer, which is so old school. I can't tell you. I just feel dirty doing that. Sorry, making smart objects is the way to do things these days. I made a duplicate so I can leave this one doing its business down here. I almost never dupe a layer just to do things with it. But anyway, I'm going to get rid of this layer mask. There. So there's Peachy. That's not a good one. Darn it. So this is a bad rendition of Peachy, I'm afraid. Let me go back to this guy. God, I didn't have to do this. All right, there's Mr. Dude again. And the question was about Smart Radius too. If I made this object a Smart Object first, I could still go to Select and Mask and do Select Subject. But with decontamination, well, that still works. But what will I get? A not smart object. So it makes a rasterized version of that smart object, essentially because it's painted on, and you can't paint directly on a smart object. So it's okay. Now regarding the Smart Radius, So let me go back to select a mask. Radius is an interesting concept. It's an odd word for it too. Here it says show edge. And as I, oh yeah, select subject. So I increase this radius, this regular radius. You see it makes this band. What did I write there? It says 8 pixels. That means 8 pixels in and 8 pixels out around around the edge of where the select subject selection was. So with marching ants, the marching ants are showing you either side of that radius, which is not what it's supposed to do. So let me turn off show edge and show you the marching ants. So it would be 8 pixels in from that edge and 8 pixels out. And what does it do in there? What it does in there, let me go back to show edge, is in that narrow band, in that narrow region, Photoshop is doing very aggressive edge detection to find the actual edges of the image, mostly based on the colors it finds. Smart Radius is not giving us much of a visual difference in this particular image's case. Usually it comes up off the jacket or something interior. Let me see if this helps. Yes, you can see if I make a stupidly large radius, Smart Radius does make a bigger difference. It works harder, essentially. It tightens up that band in which edge detection is occurring, more or less intelligently. So again, by using Radius, you're making Photoshop work harder to find those edges. By using Smart Radius, you're making it work yet harder, and it does yet better. As I said, that radius I had was kind of stupidly large. I want it to be just big enough to find the filaments of wool in that jacket and maybe whiskers on the cheek or hairs coming out of the ears, what have you. And then with the hair, we needed a bigger area in which edge detection was happening. So that's what this is for, that tool, the Refine Edge brush tool. It's finding this edge that we see when we go to that checkbox. And when we implement that, there's a larger area in which edge detection is happening aggressively. I hope that answers that question.
Another question here is, did you have to add the object selection tool to the W grouping, or is it there by default?
It is there by default. And if you haven't used it, it's pretty cool. Let me see if I can show it to you. Let me get out of here. It is pretty cunning. Oh, I'll use Peachy here. Of course, select subject used not to select Peachy very well. It didn't understand Peachy as a subject, which was heartbreaking, even on a black background like this. But these days, select subject does a fabulous job, even with Peachy. But the object selection tool, if there were other objects scattered around the image, the object selection tool, I would just draw around, and it's essentially doing select subject, but guided. I'm telling it where to use that same algorithm. So if I had other things that might be confusing to the select subject algorithm, I can direct it with the object selection tool. I hope that helps.
We just had one come up here. Here it is, from Jennifer. Why, when I drag a mask to the trash, does it sometimes also deletes the pixels on that layer?
You're not dragging carefully enough. And in fact, dragging to the trash just makes me nervous. Makes me nervous. Not because it's bad, but because things like that can happen. I might grab the wrong thing. So my preference has been, in these last few years at least, is when I can right click and do something, I'll do it that way instead. It might take me, it probably doesn't take me any longer actually, and I can be much more certain as to what the effect will be. Like if I wanted to get rid of the mask on Peachy, let me deselect here, I could right click on that layer mask thumbnail and I can either disable it or delete it or almost never apply it, which means actually delete the pixels that are hidden. I'm not into that kind of commitment, but I can delete the layer mask and it's gone. No risk of deleting what I didn't want deleted. So I prefer to right click on things and I get very specific options depending on what I right click on. On the image thumbnail, it's a different set of options. On the mask, a different set of options. And near the layer's name, yet a different set of options. So that layers panel is very touchy. So I hope that helps.
And Frank asks, are the steps to move the tools to the right side of the screen detailed in the book?
Yeah, I take a good bit of time discussing how to, well, not that much time, not like chapters, but a bit of a chapters on setup, setting preferences, customizing the workspace to your taste. When John Cornicello, who I saw presenting once at Adobe here in Seattle, and I was like, where's his tools? They're over there. And I'm like, oh, all this other stuff is over there. My God, he's brilliant. And so I've taken to doing that. And another advantage too is I've got some panels over here, like the properties panel. And here I have my 3D panel. And sometimes the two get in each other's way. Now they don't. I'm very happy about this. But it's a question of just dragging them, well, some of them anyway, around. And I just dislodge that. But I can also capture that as a custom workspace, which I can reset when I mess it up like I just did. So, and then you can have multiple. Actually, when I'm not presenting like this, I'll take advantage of both of the monitors that I have in front of me. And so panels will spread out across both, depending on what I want to have happen. Yeah.
So there's only a couple more questions in here, and actually I can answer these ones. One is,
yay.
Are the books available digitally? And I want to let you know, yes, you can get them in ebook format in 3 different ebook formats from RockyNook.com. It's one purchase, so you buy one ebook, but then what you get is you get an EPUB file that's for iBooks and iPads and stuff like that. .mobi file, which is for Kindle, and then a .pdf, which is pretty accessible on any kind of reader or on your desktop. So just for one price, you get those 3 files, and you can put them on all your different devices or just on one. That's up to you. We just give you the files so you can decide how best to use them. The other question is, perhaps I missed it, but does the book include companion image files to follow along with the tutorials? And yes, there is a link both in the book and the ebook, and you just type that URL in and there you go. Then you'll have your links there to download.
Yeah, those files are derived from the ones I use in the classroom too.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. I mean, they came to us right from Steve, so we're just hosting the files. They are really his. And one last question. I think this is a good one to end on, actually. Do you feel high school age students would be able to use your books?
Yes. Motivated ones, yeah. I believe most of my humor is no worse than PG-13.
Great.
So, and the jokes are just horrible no matter what. So, but nothing too rude.
That's great. And then we're coming up on the hour mark here. I think we might have just passed it. So I'm just going to say a couple things and then I'll let you go and I'll let everyone else go, which is just a reminder that tomorrow you're going to get an email that includes a replay of this webinar. So you can watch it again on YouTube if you want to go back and see exactly how Steve did something, or if you just missed Peachy and you want to spend some more quality time, you feel free to do that. Also, that email will include a coupon code for you if you haven't bought Steve's book yet. The code is APSCC40. I typed that into the chat earlier. You don't have to remember it. It'll be in your email tomorrow as well. So if you have any questions for me or Rocky Nook, you can email me at info@rockynook.com. If you have any questions for Steve, do you want to tell people how they can connect with you if they need to?
Sure. Luminousworks.com is the site for my business, and Steve at luminousworks.com. Don't abuse that. But yeah, if you have a question, I'll let you know if you're getting out of hand.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. This was really helpful. And thanks to everyone else who joined us. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.